Alex had been dreaming about this moment for weeks, the day he would step into the Galactic Academy. Earth was sending its first batch of students to the stars, and Alex, a young human with a thirst for adventure, had been chosen. The Academy was a place where the galaxy's most intelligent beings learned from one another. Alien species from all corners of the universe came here to study, and Alex was about to be among them. He had trained his whole life for this day. The massive, shimmering building of the Academy rose before him. The air was thick with the smell of metal and the buzz of alien chatter. It was a strange place, full of creatures with colors, shapes, and sizes that Alex could barely comprehend. Some were floating, others had multiple limbs, and there were even a few who looked like walking clouds of energy. It was all so alien, but it was also exhilarating. Today, however, was not just any ordinary day. It was the day that the alien instructors decided to have some fun at humanity's expense. They had been observing Alex and the other human students, taking note of how different they were from the other races. Humans were smaller, weaker, and less adaptable. At least, that's what the aliens thought. One of the instructors, a tall, blue-skinned alien with long, flowing tentacles named Zellor, had an idea. "Let's test these humans," Zellor said with a sly smile. "Let's see how they handle what we can throw at them." Zellor's idea wasn't cruel, at least, not in his eyes. He didn't plan on hurting anyone. It was just a prank, a harmless joke. But it would reveal how weak or strong humans truly were. The plan was simple: increase the gravity in the classroom, and watch how the humans reacted. The other instructors agreed with laughter. To them, it was just a little fun. They had seen other species handle far worse than Earth's gravity. The humans, however, had never experienced this kind of pressure before. As the bell rang, signaling the start of the class, Alex stepped into the room with his usual excitement. His classmates, a mix of alien species, were already seated. They didn't pay much attention to the humans. After all, to them, Earth was just another small, insignificant planet. Alex, however, couldn't help but feel the weight of being the only human here. "Take your seats," the instructor called out in a voice that echoed through the room. His tentacles shifted slightly, and a soft hum filled the air. It was then that Alex noticed something strange. The air around him felt different. It felt heavier. He shook it off, assuming it was just the excitement of being in such an advanced place. But as he settled into his chair, he felt something strange in his chest, a pressure, a weight that wasn't there before. Zellor watched from the front of the room, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "Let's begin," he said, and with a subtle motion, the gravity in the room started to increase. At first, Alex didn't notice much. The pressure was small, almost unnoticeable, but soon, the room began to feel heavier. His limbs started to feel sluggish, and his breathing became more difficult. The weight of his body was increasing by the second. He glanced around at the other students, and that's when he realized it wasn't just him. Everyone in the room was starting to struggle. The alien students, who had evolved to live in environments with different levels of gravity, were unaffected. But the humans? Alex and his classmates could feel it. It was as if the floor beneath them was pulling them down with a force they had never felt before. Zellor grinned. "Let's see how long they last." The gravity increased again, just slightly, but enough to make it harder for Alex to sit up straight. He clenched his fists, trying to keep his focus. His body felt like it was being crushed. His muscles strained, and his back ached. But he refused to show weakness. He wasn't going to let these aliens see him fall so easily. "What's going on?" One of the other human students whispered to Alex, his voice shaky. This is too much." Alex didn't have an answer. He had no idea what was happening, but it didn't matter. He wasn't going to back down. He looked around the room, seeing some of the alien students grinning, while others appeared to be observing with curiosity. Zellor's voice rang out. "Come on, human. Show us what you're made of." Alex felt the weight increase even more. He pushed against his desk, trying to lift himself, but the pressure was too much. His arms trembled. He could feel the sweat dripping down his forehead. The air was thick, and his chest felt like it was being crushed under a heavy weight. His breathing came in ragged gasps. He could hear the sound of his own heart pounding in his ears. But Alex wasn't going to give up. He wasn't going to let these aliens think they could push him around so easily. With all his strength, he pushed his palms against the desk, struggling to stand. The others in the room were looking at him now, some with concern, others with amusement. "Is this all you've got?" Alex muttered to himself. The words were barely audible, but they were enough to keep him going. He wasn't going to let the aliens win. Not today. Zaylor watched in surprise as Alex slowly, painfully, began to rise to his feet. The gravity was crushing, but Alex wasn't backing down. He took a deep breath, his muscles screaming in protest, and stood up straight. His legs shook beneath him, but he was standing. "You think this is bad?" Alex said with a strained voice, his eyes locking onto Zaylor's. "You haven't seen anything yet." Zaylor's grin faltered for a moment. There was something in Alex's eyes, something fierce, something that told him this human was not like the others. The room was silent for a moment, the gravity still pressing down on them, but Alex's defiance hung in the air like a challenge. The other alien students watched, their amusement turning to curiosity. No one had ever resisted this much. The tension was thick, and for the first time, Zaylor wasn't so sure about the prank anymore. It seemed like it might be a lot more than they had bargained for. Alex was struggling. His muscles screamed for relief, and his chest felt as though it were being crushed by an invisible weight. Every movement he made felt like a battle against a force stronger than he had ever imagined. But despite the pain, something within him refused to break. His mind sharpened, focusing solely on the idea of standing tall in front of these aliens who thought of him as nothing more than a fragile creature. The alien students around him seemed unfazed by the increasing gravity. Some of them were still sitting comfortably in their seats, their expressions ranging from mild curiosity to mild amusement. Alex could see the smirk on Zaylor's face, the instructor who had initiated this test. But in that moment, something changed in the air. It wasn't just the weight of the gravity. It was the weight of defiance. Alex wasn't alone in his struggle. His fellow human students were also fighting against the crushing force, their bodies trembling, their faces strained with effort. One of them, Sarah, was beside him, her hands gripping the desk so tightly that her knuckles were turning white. The determination in her eyes was clear. She wasn't going to let this break her either. "Come on, Alex," Sarah gasped, her voice barely audible. "We can do this." He gave her a brief nod, though it was hard to keep his focus. His body was on the verge of collapse. But as he stood there, feeling the strain with every second, something else happened. His mind was no longer focused just on surviving. It was focused on proving a point to himself, to Sarah, and to every alien in that room who thought they could break him. Zaylor, standing at the front of the room, was watching intently. His eyes gleamed with satisfaction, but even he couldn't hide his surprise as Alex continued to hold his ground. The other instructors exchanged looks, but no one dared to intervene yet. They were curious, too. What would the humans do in the face of such overwhelming odds? As Alex looked around, he noticed that some of the alien students were starting to look less confident. It wasn't the gravity they were worried about. It was the human resolve. The aliens had seen many species struggle under pressure, but none like this. Humans were different. Their fighting spirit was something they had not anticipated, and it was starting to show. "Impressive," Zaylor said, his voice deep and calm. But there was a hint of uncertainty in it now, a hint that hadn't been there before. "I didn't expect you to last this long." The other students were starting to whisper among themselves. Alex could hear fragments of their conversations, murmurs of disbelief. How is he still standing? One alien student whispered, "I thought humans were weak." Another said, almost to themselves. But no one dared to move. They were all waiting, watching, fascinated by the display of human strength. "Enough," Zaylor finally said, raising his hand. The gravity started to lessen, but the room didn't feel any lighter. It wasn't the physical pressure that weighed on Alex now. It was the pressure of expectation. He had shown them that humans were not to be underestimated. He had shown them that, no matter how tough things got, humanity would fight. And he had just begun to prove it. Alex slowly straightened his back, taking deep, shaky breaths as the gravity began to ease. His legs wobbled under him, but he stood firm, never once breaking eye contact with Zaylor. He had refused to give up, and he had made a point. Humans weren't just another species to be laughed at. They had strength, they had resolve, and he was ready to show everyone in that room exactly what humans were capable of. "Is that all?" Alex managed to say, his voice hoarse but strong. "I thought this was supposed to be a test." Zaylor's smile faded for a moment, replaced by an unreadable expression. "You've passed your first test," he said, his tone no longer filled with amusement. "But there are many more to come." The other alien students were still watching Alex, some with curiosity, some with awe, and some with respect. They hadn't expected a human to endure this much. They hadn't expected one to stand so defiant against the odds. Alex wiped the sweat from his brow and finally sat back down. His body was still aching and his muscles burned, but his spirit was unbroken. This was just the beginning. The room had gone quiet. The tension in the air was thick. It wasn't just the gravity that was pressing down on them now. It was the realization that this human, this species that so many thought of as weak, had just shown them something they weren't ready for. Something powerful. Something relentless. As the class continued, Zaylor's expression was no longer one of amusement. He wasn't sure what to make of Alex or the humans anymore. What had started as a prank had turned into something much more significant. The aliens in the room were starting to realize that humans might not be the easiest species to deal with after all. And as Alex sat there, breathing heavily, sweat dripping from his forehead, he knew that this was only the beginning. There were more challenges ahead, and he was ready to face them all. The galaxy had underestimated humanity, but they wouldn't do so for long. The human students, though still tired and sore, felt a surge of pride. They weren't the weak ones anymore. In this room, they had shown their worth. And they had shown it in a way that no one would forget. As the class went on, one thing became clear. Humanity had made its mark, and the galaxy would never be the same again. Alex's muscles were sore, and his mind still buzzed from the intensity of the gravity test. But it wasn't the physical strain that weighed heavily on him now. It was the silent recognition in the room. The realization that humanity wasn't as weak as everyone thought. The aliens around him might not have shown it openly, but he could feel the shift in the atmosphere. The underestimation was over. Zaylor, standing at the front, hadn't said much after the gravity test ended. His eyes now flickered from student to student, but his usual smirk had vanished. He was focused, calculating. The alien instructor hadn't expected Alex to last that long, and that discomfort was still written across his face. But Zaylor was an experienced teacher. He wouldn't let a simple setback shake his authority. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Sarah, who had been fighting the gravity just like Alex, was sitting next to him now, wiping the sweat from her brow. Her face was a mixture of exhaustion and pride, but there was an edge of worry in her eyes. "Do you think they'll try something else?" she asked in a hushed voice. Alex glanced at Zaylor, who was watching them carefully, almost as if he knew they were talking about him. "They'll try," Alex said, his voice low. "But we'll be ready." Zaylor didn't speak for a long moment, but then, with a snap of his fingers, a holographic screen appeared in front of him. It flickered with alien symbols and strange graphs, but the meaning was clear enough for the human students to understand. "Now, we test your adaptability," Zaylor announced, his voice cutting through the silence. You have shown you can endure. Now, let's see how well you can think when under pressure." The tension in the room ratcheted up a notch. Alex sat straighter, his eyes narrowing. Whatever came next, he would face it head-on. He could sense the unease among his classmates. Some were nervous. Others were anxious. But Alex could also see the spark in their eyes, the same one that burned in his. Humanity wasn't here to fail. They weren't here to bow to the expectations of the galaxy. Zelor's voice cut through the growing uncertainty. "You will now face the perception test. It is a challenge of strategy, speed, and most importantly, decision-making. Fail, and you will suffer the consequences." With a gesture, the room shifted. The walls, which had previously been a dull gray, began to transform. They stretched and reshaped into a complex maze of mirrors and moving walls. The floor shifted, becoming uneven and unpredictable. The once open space was now a labyrinth of confusion and disorientation. Alex squinted, trying to make sense of the maze. It was unlike anything he had ever seen before. The mirrors weren't just reflections. They were like windows to different paths, each one leading to different challenges. It was a mind game, and Zelor knew humans weren't accustomed to this type of test. The alien species present in the room had evolved to navigate such tricks. They were naturally more attuned to this kind of challenge. "You have 1 hour to navigate this maze," Zelor continued, his voice laced with an almost cruel calmness. "If you make it out in time, you pass. Fail, and you will feel the full effects of your weakness." Alex's heart started to race, but his mind was already working. He could feel the eyes of his fellow students on him. But it wasn't just their gazes he felt. It was Zelor's. The instructor was studying them, waiting for one of them to crack under pressure. "Are you ready?" Zelor asked, his tone now serious. He seemed to almost dare them to fail. Alex turned to Sarah. He could see the fear in her eyes, but she wasn't backing down. The same determination that had been present during the gravity test still burned in her. "Let's do this," Alex said, his voice steady. He stood up, and with a quick glance to Sarah, he started walking toward the maze. The first steps into the maze were disorienting. Alex could hear the sound of footsteps echoing around him. He glanced back to see Sarah following closely, but she, too, was looking at the mirrors, trying to figure out which path to take. Every reflection distorted reality, making it hard to trust anything they saw. Alex's mind raced. The first thing he needed to do was silence the panic and focus on his goal. But that was easier said than done. The further they walked, the more the maze seemed to shift, the walls constantly moving, rearranging themselves in ways that made it difficult to predict what was ahead. One moment, they were headed straight for a dead end. And the next, the path opened up in front of them, offering new choices. The pressure was mounting. The clock was ticking. "We can't waste time," Alex muttered. "We have to think fast." Sarah nodded, her eyes darting around the maze. "Which way?" she asked, her voice tight. Alex paused. He could hear footsteps behind them. Alien students, no doubt, trying to navigate the maze too. The pressure was building, but they had no time to waste. He reached out to touch one of the mirrors, his fingers brushing against the smooth surface. The reflection stared back at him, but something was off. The mirror didn't show his face. It showed a distorted version of himself, an image that flickered and warped. "Something's wrong," Alex said under his breath. The mirror's reflection shifted again, and Alex felt a strange sense of unease wash over him. This wasn't just a test of their physical endurance, it was a test of their minds. If they couldn't trust what they saw, if they couldn't think fast, they would fail. And failure here meant more than just losing a test. It meant giving the aliens another reason to call humans weak. Alex wasn't going to let that happen. Not today. Not ever. "We need to stay calm," Alex said to Sarah, his voice low but determined. "Trust your instincts." She gave him a quick nod, her expression grim. It was clear they both knew what was at stake. They weren't just fighting to pass some test. They were fighting for humanity's place in the galaxy. They stepped forward together, ready to face whatever came next. The maze wasn't just a test. It was a battle for survival. And the humans weren't going to back down. The further Alex and Sarah ventured into the shifting labyrinth, the more the maze seemed to bend and twist around them. Each step they took felt like it took them deeper into an unknown void, a place where reality itself seemed to warp and distort. The walls, once solid and predictable, were now shimmering and translucent, revealing hidden corridors that led to even darker, more confusing passages. Alex could feel his heartbeat pounding in his chest, not from the physical exertion, though that was a challenge in itself, but from the growing uncertainty that gnawed at him. The clock was ticking. They had no idea how much time had passed, but the pressure was undeniable. Every wrong turn, every wrong decision, brought them closer to failure. And failure here would mean disgrace, not just for them, but for humanity as a whole. "Alex, do you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her voice shaky as she stopped in her tracks. Alex froze, his senses sharpening. At first, it was faint, like a low hum vibrating through the air. But then, it became clearer, a sound that seemed to reverberate through the very ground beneath them. It wasn't just the usual sounds of the maze shifting. This was something else. "I hear it," Alex said, his voice tight with unease. "It sounds like..." Suddenly, the walls around them flickered, and the maze seemed to shift again, faster this time. The reflective surfaces warped in a flash, creating a series of twisted mirrors that now surrounded them. They couldn't tell which way was forward anymore, or if they were even going in the right direction at all. Sarah turned to him, her eyes wide with fear. "What's happening? This wasn't part of the test." Alex swallowed, his mind racing. "I don't know, but we need to stay calm. We have to keep moving." The hum grew louder, and they both instinctively moved in the direction of the sound. Something inside of Alex told him that the source of the noise was important. It was their way out of the maze. But as they advanced, the walls seemed to grow closer, blocking their path and squeezing them into tighter and tighter corridors. The air felt heavy, and the pressure on Alex's chest intensified. It wasn't just the physical strain anymore. The maze was now testing their ability to keep their minds intact under stress. Alex's eyes darted to the reflections around him. The distorted mirrors were no longer showing just the walls. They now reflected images of alien faces, expressions twisted in mockery, as though the maze itself was mocking them. Each face was different. Some were alien, some human, and some even monstrous. But they all shared the same unnerving feature. They were grinning. "Are we being watched?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alex didn't answer right away. He didn't want to admit it, but the feeling of being observed was overwhelming. He couldn't shake the sense that someone, or something, was controlling their every move. Suddenly, there was a loud clang from behind them, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. The sound was muffled, but it was unmistakable. Someone, or something, was chasing them. "Go!" Alex barked, grabbing Sarah by the arm and pulling her forward. There was no time to think, no time to hesitate. The walls seemed to close in around them, pushing them faster and faster through the maze. Every step felt like it could be their last. They had no idea if the footsteps behind them were the aliens, other students, or something else entirely. But one thing was clear: they had to keep moving. As they rounded a corner, the sound of footsteps faded, and the maze seemed to shift once again. The reflections in the mirrors flickered more violently now, distorting the images until they became unreadable. Alex's mind raced, trying to make sense of the madness around him. "There!" Sarah shouted suddenly, pointing to a small opening in the wall. It was a narrow gap, almost invisible, hidden behind the mirrors and shadows. But it was a way forward. Without a second thought, Alex charged toward it, pulling Sarah along behind him. As they squeezed through the narrow opening, the pressure in the air seemed to release for just a moment, and they emerged into an open chamber. The walls were now smooth and unreflective, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Alex could take a breath without the weight of the maze pressing on his chest. "Are we out?" Sarah asked, panting. Alex scanned the room. It was dark, but there were faint lights in the distance. He couldn't see anything clearly yet, but the sense of relief was palpable. They had made it through. For now. "We're not out yet," Alex muttered, "but we're closer. This has to be the next phase." As they slowly made their way further into the chamber, the air grew colder. The room was silent now, the hum gone. Alex felt a chill run down his spine, a sense that the calm was an illusion. They weren't safe yet. Whatever Zelor had planned next, it was coming. And it wouldn't be kind. Sarah reached out and grabbed Alex's arm. "Do you think they'll change the rules again? The gravity, the maze, what else could they do?" Alex shook his head, his mind already focused on what was ahead. "It doesn't matter. Whatever they throw at us, we have to face it. Together." The light ahead flickered, and for a brief moment, Alex thought he saw something in the shadows, an outline, just barely visible. It was moving. "Stay sharp," he warned, pulling Sarah closer. "I think we're about to find out what's really waiting for us." And with that, they pressed forward into the unknown. The maze had been just the beginning. As Alex and Sarah moved deeper into the chamber, the lights began to flicker more rapidly, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. The cold air seemed to carry a weight of tension, as if something was waiting for them. Something far worse than anything they had faced before. Every step felt like they were walking through the heart of a predator's den, where every shadow could hide a threat. The chamber was vast, its walls made of strange material that pulsed with a faint, unnatural light. Alex felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise, the instinct to turn and run gnawing at him. But he didn't. They couldn't afford to retreat now. Not after everything they had endured. They were too far into this trial. Suddenly, the lights dimmed to a near blackout. The temperature dropped even further, sending chills down Alex's spine. Then, as if in response to their fear, the shadows moved. At first, they were just flickers in the corner of his eye. Small, subtle changes. But then, the shadows coalesced into figures, humanoid shapes that seemed to emerge from the darkness itself. "Stay close," Alex said in a low voice, pulling Sarah to him as the figures approached. The first shadow stepped forward, its body tall and angular, its face hidden beneath a dark hood. It moved silently, effortlessly, like a wraith gliding across the floor. Behind it, more figures appeared, their glowing eyes now fixed on Alex and Sarah. They were surrounded. The figures circled them like predators. Sarah's grip tightened on Alex's arm. "What are they? What do they want?" Alex's heart raced. He had no answers. These weren't just random hallucinations or tricks. The aliens, they weren't like anything they'd faced before. These figures had the same presence as the alien instructors, but there was something darker, something more predatory about them. The first figure raised a hand, and Alex felt a strange pull in his chest. His vision blurred for a moment as if the very air around him was changing, shifting to a reality he couldn't understand. But then the figure spoke, its voice smooth and cold, echoing through the chamber. "You've reached the heart of this trial," it said. "Now you must prove that you are worthy of the next phase. If you fail, you will not leave here." The word hung in the air, heavy with menace. Alex's stomach churned. There was no way out. They were trapped. And the only way forward was through whatever challenge these shadowy figures had in store for them. "You will face your fears," the figure continued, its voice now colder than ice. "Your minds will be tested. Only those who can overcome themselves will survive." Before Alex could respond, the ground beneath their feet trembled. The walls seemed to ripple like water, and a distant sound, like thunder, rumbled through the chamber. Then the lights flashed bright and white, blinding them for a moment. When the light faded, they were no longer in the chamber. They were somewhere else entirely. Alex's feet were standing on solid ground, but it didn't feel right. The air smelled different. The sky above was a dull gray, and an oppressive silence hung over everything. All around them, a vast city sprawled out like a maze of steel and stone. But there was no life, no movement, nothing. Just the eerie quiet that made Alex's skin crawl. "What is this place?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Alex looked around, but nothing made sense. They had been in the chamber, but now they were standing in a completely different world. A city that seemed abandoned, forgotten by time. The buildings loomed above them, dark and imposing, like giants watching from above. Then Alex felt it, a faint pressure in his chest, like something was pulling at him, tugging him towards one of the towering buildings. He felt an instinct to move, to go toward the source of the pull. It was almost as if his mind had been linked to something ancient and powerful. Without saying anything, Alex started walking, his steps deliberate. Sarah followed close behind, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. "Do you feel that?" Alex asked, glancing over his shoulder. Sarah nodded, but she didn't speak. There was no need for words. They both knew that whatever this place was, it was a test, a trial. And they were at its mercy. The city loomed larger as they walked through its streets, but the silence remained. Not a single bird chirped, not a single breeze moved through the cracked streets. It was as if the entire world was dead. Finally, they'd reached the base of one of the massive buildings. It was an ancient structure, its surface scarred by time. But there was a door, an entrance, almost hidden in the shadows. It was their only way forward. As they approached the door, a loud crackling noise echoed through the air, and the ground beneath them began to shake. Alex's breath quickened. Something was happening. Something big. The door in front of them slid open with a loud hiss, revealing a dark, narrow hallway. "Are you ready?" Alex asked Sarah, his voice low. Sarah didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a deep breath, her fingers trembling. "We don't have a choice." Together, they stepped through the door. The hallway stretched out before them like an endless tunnel. But what lay ahead, they couldn't yet see. The maze wasn't just physical anymore. It was mental, and they were only just beginning to understand what kind of game they were playing. As they moved forward, the shadows closed in around them. The figures from the chamber were no longer visible, but Alex knew they were still watching, waiting for him to falter. "Keep going," he muttered to Sarah, trying to ignore the growing dread inside him. "We have to keep going." But as they moved deeper into the darkness, Alex realized one terrifying truth. There was no guarantee they would ever make it out alive. The maze, it seemed, wasn't just testing their endurance. It was testing their very will to survive. And he wasn't sure if they were ready for what came next. The hallway stretched before Alex and Sarah, its walls closing in as if the very structure of the maze was alive, breathing with malevolent intent. Every step they took echoed in the silence, the sound amplifying their growing unease. The flickering lights above cast long shadows that seemed to move of their own accord, following them like silent watchers. Alex's heart pounded in his chest. The pull that had guided them here was stronger now, tugging at him from within, urging him forward with an unknown purpose. He glanced over at Sarah, who walked beside him, her face a mask of fear and determination. "This isn't real," she whispered, as if trying to convince herself. "This is just a test. It's just a test." Alex didn't reply. He didn't have the words. Deep down, he knew they weren't just being tested physically. Something deeper was at play here. The mental and emotional toll of this trial was beginning to crack their resolve. And the worst part was the feeling that they were being watched by something far more ancient and powerful than they could comprehend. As they reached the end of the hallway, the walls parted, revealing a vast chamber. The room was dark, almost suffocating in its emptiness. In the center, an enormous stone structure loomed, its surface covered in strange, glowing symbols that pulsed with an otherworldly energy. "What is this place?" Sarah breathed, stepping into the room cautiously. Alex didn't have an answer, but the pull inside him grew stronger as they neared the structure. It was as though the very air around them thickened, vibrating with an energy that sent tingles through his skin. "Welcome to the heart of the trial," a voice boomed, echoing through the chamber. The voice was cold and commanding, reverberating with power. It seemed to come from everywhere, yet nowhere at all. Sarah froze, her hand clutching Alex's arm as the voice spoke again. "You have made it this far, but you are not done yet. To proceed, you must face the greatest fear you have ever known." The air seemed to grow colder, the shadows in the room stretching as if reaching out to grab them. Alex felt a knot form in his stomach. He had been expecting something like this. The trials had never been about survival alone. They were designed to break the human spirit, to test how much one could endure before giving up. "What do you mean by our greatest fear?" Alex demanded, his voice shaking slightly. The voice did not answer immediately. Instead, the stone structure in the center of the room began to glow brighter, its surface shifting like liquid metal. The glowing symbols seemed to pulse in time with Alex's heartbeat. The chamber was alive with energy, as though the very foundations of the room were connected to the universe itself. And then, the floor beneath them shifted. The once still ground trembled as cracks formed, splitting the room in two. Alex stumbled, grabbing Sarah to steady her. The glow intensified, and the air grew heavy, thick with an oppressive force. And then the room changed. In an instant, the chamber was no longer the cold, lifeless space they had entered. Instead, it became a battlefield, a desolate war zone, with explosions and gunfire echoing in the distance. The ground was littered with the wreckage of shattered ships and the bodies of soldiers, humans and aliens alike. Alex stared in disbelief. This was his greatest fear, his nightmare come to life. The image before him was too real, too familiar. "It's just an illusion," he whispered to himself, but his voice wavered. The fear was real. It felt real. The destruction, the death. It all felt like something he had experienced before, something that haunted him. "I can't do this," Sarah said, her voice breaking. She looked around, her eyes wide with terror. This is what I feared most." The battlefield around them began to twist and warp, and suddenly, Alex was standing alone. Sarah was gone. His heart skipped a beat as panic set in. He spun around, trying to find her, but the world was spinning out of control. "Sarah, Sarah," he shouted, but his voice was drowned out by the chaos. The ground beneath him cracked open, and he fell into darkness. When Alex opened his eyes, he found himself back in the chamber, breathing heavily. The eerie silence pressed against his ears, and for a moment, he wasn't sure where he was. The stone structure in the center of the room glowed softly, its symbols still pulsing with that strange energy. But something was different. Sarah was back, standing beside him, her face pale and shaken. She was breathing just as heavily as Alex, her body trembling with fear. Did you see it too?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Alex nodded, still trying to shake off the effects of the nightmare. "It was like I was there, like I was back on the battlefield, fighting for my life. He trailed off, realizing just how real it had felt. The pain, the fear, the loss, it all felt too familiar. It was the memory of the war they had fought long ago, the war that had almost destroyed them, the war that had left him scared, both physically and emotionally. "That wasn't real," Sarah said, her voice more determined now. "It was just an illusion. We're not there. We're here, and we can't let this break us." Alex looked at her, and for the first time since entering the trial, He felt a sense of hope flicker inside him. Sarah was right. This was just another part of the test. Another challenge they had to overcome. They had to keep moving. "We can't stop now," Alex said, his voice steadying. "We've come too far." Together, they turned toward the stone structure, ready to face whatever came next. Because in the end, the greatest enemy wasn't the trial itself. It was the fear inside them, and they weren't about to let it defeat them now. The path to survival lay ahead, and Alex knew that the worst was yet to come. Alex and Sarah stood at the edge of the chamber, the stone structure before them pulsing with an unnatural rhythm, its light casting strange shadows that danced across the walls. The air was thick with tension, a palpable weight that seemed to press against their chests. Every part of the room felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The final trial was upon them, and they could feel it in their bones. The voice that had guided them through the trial spoke again, cold and detached. "You have come far, humans, but the final choice is yours. It is not enough to survive. You must choose who you will become. Will you give in to fear? Will you let it consume you? Or will you rise above it and become something greater?" Alex felt the weight of the words settle heavily on him. This was it, the moment that would determine everything. The trials had been a test of their endurance, their strength, and their will. But this was different. This was about more than survival. It was about who they were, who they could be. Sarah stood beside him, her face pale but determined. "Alex," she whispered, her voice shaking slightly. "We've been through so much already. We can't stop now." Alex nodded, his mind racing. The fear that had once gripped him seemed distant now, almost irrelevant. They had faced the worst of it, the illusions, the doubts, the nightmares, and they had come out stronger on the other side. But now, it was time to face the truth. The room around them seemed to shift, the walls and floor bending as though they were alive. The stone structure began to crack, its surface splitting open like a cocoon shedding its skin. From the cracks, a brilliant light poured out, blinding them for a moment. And then, as the light faded, they saw it. Before them stood an entity, a being unlike anything they had ever seen. It was neither human nor alien, but something entirely different, something ancient and powerful. Its form was fluid, shifting like liquid metal, and its eyes glowed with an intensity that made Alex's heart race. "You stand at the crossroads of your fate," the entity said, its voice echoing like thunder. "The path you choose will shape not only your future but the future of your species. Will you embrace the darkness within you, or will you harness the power of your greatest strength, your unity, your humanity?" Alex felt a surge of emotion. The choice before him was clear, but it was also terrifying. It wasn't just about him and Sarah anymore. It was about Earth, about their entire species, about the legacy they would leave in the galaxy. "We're not perfect," Alex said, his voice steady. "But we've fought through the darkness. We've survived when others would have given up. And we'll keep fighting. Not just for ourselves, but for everyone. For humanity." The entity regarded him silently, its glowing eyes intense, studying him, as if weighing his every word. "You have chosen," it finally said. "But know this, the road ahead will not be easy. Your enemies are many, and the galaxy is vast. The power you seek comes at a cost. You must be prepared to sacrifice everything." Alex looked at Sarah, and she met his gaze, her expression resolute. Together, they had come this far. Together, they would face whatever came next. "We're ready," Sarah said, her voice firm. The entity's form shimmered as though it was approving of their answer. "Then you have earned your place," it said. "The galaxy will know the name of Earth, and it will never forget the humans who dared to challenge the stars." The light that had surrounded the entity began to swirl around them, enveloping Alex and Sarah in its glow. They felt a surge of power, raw and untamed, as the energy of the chamber flowed into them. It wasn't just the power of the trials that they had endured. It was the power of humanity itself, the strength of will, the determination to survive, and the unyielding desire to protect what mattered most. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, the light faded. The room was silent once more. Alex and Sarah stood in the center of the chamber, their bodies pulsing with newfound energy. The air felt different now, charged with an electric anticipation. The trials were over, but their journey had only just begun. The entity, now a faint echo in their minds, left them with one final message. Go, the galaxy awaits you. As they turned to leave, Alex glanced at Sarah. The fear that had once gripped him had been replaced with something else, something stronger, hope. Together, they stepped into the unknown, knowing that whatever came next, they were ready. For the first time since they had entered the trials, Alex felt certain of one thing: humanity would not be forgotten. The galaxy would learn to fear them. And this was only the beginning.